Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving straight into the sweeping waves of change that have literally defined the Australian continent. From its ancient, deep-time origins all the way to the urgent complexities of the modern day, Australia's story is this incredible saga of dramatic shifts, intense environmental adaptations, and just absolute human resilience. We're looking at a landmass that has constantly reinvented itself, shaped by both the forces of nature and the millions of people who have called it home.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through 5 distinct eras. The first Australians, colonization and convicts, forging a nation, the post-war boom, and finally, modern Australia's challenges. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The first Australians.
60,000 years. Just let that massive number sink in for a second. Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander peoples inhabited Australia for tens of thousands of years before any European contact ever happened. To really put that into perspective, we are talking about one of the world's oldest continuous cultures. They lived in this immense isolation from the rest of the globe, passing down super complex knowledge, languages, and traditions through just countless generations.
And here's the thing. They didn't just barely survive out there. They absolutely thrived in a pretty harsh environment. Using highly sophisticated land management techniques like fire stick farming, they intentionally used controlled burns to clear underbrush, encourage new plant growth, and actually make hunting easier. They fundamentally shaped the ecosystem over millennia. It was like living as a deeply active, totally connected piece of the landscape itself.
Moving on to Section 2, colonization and convicts.
Now that incredible isolation eventually hits a massive, sudden wall. Contact with Europeans didn't happen all at once. It escalated really rapidly. We see vague sightings as early as 1522 by Magellan's crew. Then, in 1616, the Dutch ship Duyfken spots Great Sandy Bay. But it all really culminates in 1770 when Captain James Cook arrives on the Endeavour and formally claims Botany Bay for England. That moment completely altered the trajectory of the entire continent.
Just a few years later, by 1788, the First Fleet arrives at Botany Bay, permanently establishing a British penal colony. And this drastically displaced the indigenous population through violent expansion and the devastating introduction of new diseases. The world they had expertly managed for 60 millennia was radically transformed, pretty much overnight.
For those arriving Europeans, the reality was also incredibly grim. As historian Robert Hughes put it, some went blind, some fell sick, some died, all put on a stature of stupidity, agony, and madness. It was a brutal beginning for a colony built entirely on forced labor, profound isolation, and exile at what felt like the absolute edge of the known world.
Which brings us to Section 3, forging a nation. Okay, picture this. You're digging around and you stumble across a 13-pound chunk of solid gold. In 1851, that exact discovery in New South Wales triggered an unprecedented gold rush that changed the game forever. That single massive chunk of metal shifted the entire identity of the land. Almost instantly, Australia transformed from being seen as this grim penal outpost to a booming global destination of unimaginable wealth, opportunity, and just feverish ambition.
As you can imagine, word of that kind of wealth spread like wildfire, firing off wave after wave of mass immigration. British arrivals surged, and we saw assisted passages bringing in Danish, French, and Swedish migrants all seeking their fortunes. In total, 500,000 immigrants rushed to the Australian colonies between 1851 and 1871. The population simply exploded to keep up with the insatiable demands of the goldfields.
So all of this explosive economic momentum eventually culminates in 1901. After decades of colonial experience and rapid expansion, the 6 distinct colonies made a monumental decision. They decided to surrender some of their individual powers to forge a unified Commonwealth of Australia. A brand new, unified nation-state was officially born on the global stage, finally ready to govern itself.
But we have to look at the deep contradictions built right into the foundation of this new nation. On one hand, you have the 1901 White Australia policy, which were laws explicitly designed to restrict non-British immigration. And that contrasts incredibly sharply with the vibrant, multicultural open doors that we see following the 1960s. It was a massive demographic whiplash, moving from strict, exclusionary laws to eventually embracing a huge global cultural shift.
Section 4, the post-war boom. After the World Wars, Australia realized they urgently needed to grow, and I mean fast.
So to fuel this post-war boom, they admitted 1.5 million foreign migrants in just 5 years. You had the famous 10-pound assisted passages enticing British migrants over, right alongside waves of displaced persons coming from a war-torn Europe. Plus, thanks to those fast Boeing 707 jets, what used to be a grueling, weeks-long sea voyage became a relatively quick flight. That completely shifted the nation's character as the population ballooned from 7 million up to 11.5 million.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the data. If we fast forward to the 2016 census, we see the astonishing legacy of those policies. 27% of Australians now speak a language other than English at home. Think about that. That is more than a quarter of the entire population. It's the direct, lasting result of those post-war immigration pushes, which ultimately turned metropolitan areas like Sydney and Melbourne into some of the most vibrant and culturally diverse cities on the entire planet.
And it wasn't just language. The demographic shift completely rewove the country's cultural fabric. As traditional Christian affiliations have declined over time, the census data shows this incredible recent surge in Islamic, Hindu, and Buddhist communities. Hundreds of thousands of new adherents have brought entirely new traditions, perspectives, and energy, creating a multifaceted, truly modern society. And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, Modern Australia's Challenges.
Now, obviously, rapid growth brings immense pressure. Despite being the 14th largest economy in the world today, severe economic disparity definitely persists. The income of the poorest 1% has actually decreased by a third since 1979, while the wealthiest have just seen their share skyrocket. This deepening economic divide heavily impacts vulnerable social groups, single parents, and the unemployed who are all struggling against a constantly rising cost of living. Beyond the economy, there are some really severe environmental and cultural conflicts happening right now. We see this immense tension between ancient, sustainable Indigenous land management and booming modern coal mine developments. You've got communities advocating fiercely for the conservation of lands they've literally managed for millennia, juxtaposed directly against the massive resource industries that drive the nation's export economy but undeniably threaten critical ancient habitats.
And frankly, the environment itself is reacting in a major way. We are seeing the escalating real-time impacts of climate change playing out today. We are looking at severe, record-breaking floods in major cities, devastating bushfires tearing through Victoria, increased cyclone activity battering the coastlines, and a significant decline in vital marine ecosystems. These events pose a very real existential threat to both those sprawling coastal metropolitans and the traditional Indigenous communities whose local ecologies are shifting fast.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. How will Australia balance its deep, ancient heritage with its high-powered modern economy to survive a changing climate? The waves of history are clearly still crashing, and how this incredibly diverse, ancient nation navigates them next is going to define its entire future. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.